Welcome to the Mosera Torah podcast for Parshas Va'era. Join us as we explore the weekly Parsha, uncovering valuable insights and striving to become the best versions of ourselves through Musar teachings. If you think about it, Pharaoh's reaction to the Makos is extremely difficult to understand. He suffered through a week of blood instead of water, then a week of frogs infesting every place you could imagine, and some that we can't imagine. He was struck then with a week of lice being everywhere. Pharaoh was steadfast, and as a reward, he had a week of wild animals attacking his kingdom, and then a week of all of the livestock of the nation dying. After all of these plagues that Hashem brought on Pharaoh, yet again he decided to ignore the pain and suffering and harden his heart one more time, not letting Bnei Yisrael go. How could this logically be understood? Rav Volbe Zeichel Levracha notes that the entire Shema revolves around the concept that a person's heart plays a role in one's avodas Hashem. Here are three examples from Shema. In the second paragraph it says, and then finally in the last paragraph it says, once we have experienced the destruction brought by our hearts going astray, we need to make an extra effort to not have that happen a second time. The key to success in Avodas Hashem, Rav Volbe explains, is the ability for our Torah and our Avodah to penetrate our hearts. It isn't enough to learn and perform the mitzvos. Hashem's words must be firmly implanted in our hearts. This was the critical mistake Pharaoh made. He suffered through all the plagues and was miserable as the rest of his fellow countrymen. However, he put on a tough face and didn't allow the pain and suffering to penetrate into his heart. As soon as the danger was over, he reverted to his old ways. Although Pharaoh was cognizant of what was happening, this stayed in his brain and did not reach his heart. This is why Hashem told Moshe, "This time I am sending all of his plagues to his heart." The only way to change Pharaoh was to ensure the suffering penetrated into his heart. When you think about it, it is amazing to see how human nature can block out the most earth-shattering events and remain unaffected. What is even more amazing is that we do this ourselves all the time. We often know what we should be doing, but we simply ignore this knowledge and instead act on our impulses. We may be receiving messages from Hashem, but we do whatever we can to prevent those messages from entering into our hearts. Sometimes we have to take a lesson from Pharaoh. We need to stop closing our eyes to what we know is true and begin serving Hashem with heartfelt avoda. This week's Parsha teaches us a profound lesson through Pharaoh's resistance to change. While we might shake our heads at his stubbornness and his refusal to heed the warnings of the Makos, we need to look inward and recognize how often we ourselves put up similar barriers to growth and to change in our own lives. The message is clear. True growth in our avodas Hashem requires more than just intellectual understanding. It demands that we allow wisdom to penetrate our hearts. As we've seen from Rav Volbe's analysis of the Shema, our hearts play a central role in our relationship with Hashem. When we find ourselves stuck in patterns that we know aren't serving our highest purpose, perhaps we're following in Pharaoh's footsteps by hardening our hearts against the messages we are meant to receive. This week, let's challenge ourselves to be more receptive to the lessons Hashem sends our way. Instead of merely acknowledging them intellectually, let's work to internalize them in our hearts, where real transformation begins. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Mosera Torah podcast. Until next week, may we all merit to serve Hashem with both our minds and our hearts. Have a good Shabbos.